was really interested to ask you about the history of 1812 because that was a surprise to me. To me, the War of 1812 is Dolly Madison rescuing paintings in the White House. And it's, the Battle of New Orleans in 1815. We took a little trip. You know that song?
Mm-hmm.
Resisting the urge to sing the whole thing. About it, I remembered, there were battles up on Lake Erie, and was it
Gettysburg? You had horrible battles. Like, if you've ever seen the movie Patriot, Mel Gibson's movie.
Yeah, yes. But the Gettysburg, is that part of 1812, the Battle of 1812 or the War of 1812?
I'm not sure, but Jack Kenna, I'm trying to figure out which shows Jack is on. He's on Paranormal Witness. I believe he's one of your big paranormal investigators. And Jack was up this neck of the woods visiting because he had a show to do in Toronto. And the funny part is they were down below on our property. We have an acre and a half where the house is built in the side of a escarpment of hill.
Mm-hmm. Now, what did you say happened on your property?
Supposedly there was like a haunting. Like, I've only lived in this property for 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
Previous owners said they would see Native Americans on the property, ghosts of them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, because I hosted a show on this, I'd have countless parties and get-togethers here. So, quote unquote, these paranormal investigators, supposed psychics, mediums, they would be here and they would say, "No, we don't feel anything, or we nothing."
Interesting.
So they had what is called an obelisk or something that they use. So they were down below, and Jack was down there with this other psychic person, whatever he is or claims to be. And this thing started talking to Jack, and Jack knew what it was. And this is the part where I'm like, okay, you guys shouldn't be playing with that stuff. I personally wouldn't, but they're doing it. And Jack is saying what was torturing him, speaking through this thing, was the disembodied ghost or whatever from Gettysburg. It followed him wherever he is. So I'm sitting there thinking, I walk away, coming back towards the house. Everybody's here. Everybody's wine and cheese hanging out. Mm-hmm. And I'm sitting there. Sucks to be you, dude. You live down that neck of the woods, and this thing don't live on my property. It's haunted. You're the one haunted by it. It's
how far is Gettysburg from you?
Oh, like
it's quite a ways, isn't it? Yeah.
8 hours, 8 to 10 hours, I would guess.
Yeah.
Easily.
Yeah.
Because it's close to Washington. It's so close to BC. I've been to Gettysburg before.
Yeah.
Washington, and I'm just sitting there thinking, because going back, we had the bloodiest battles here. They were horrific.
Tell me about some of those, because like I said, I think of the War of 1812 as being Washington, D.C. and New Orleans.
Oh.
And I'm trying to remember some of the battles that took place up by the Canadian border.
Well, you had the British fighting the Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And in Youngstown, New York, which is across the ditch from Niagara on the Lake. And if you go to my YouTube channel, Niagara's Historical Niagara TV show,
mm-hmm.
there's an episode on the forts. And I actually have that fort in there.
I saw that one. I didn't get time to read it, watch it, but
yeah, the Americans have a Spanish castle in that fort that they used as a bunker during the War of 1812 because they beat the crap out of the Brits and they sent them home packing. Mm-hmm. But they were trying to colonize like the States, and they were trying to do all this stuff. The Americans literally, old Fort Erie, which is really cool. It's an old fort there. In fact, the Americans burned it to the ground. And one of the first people to come over and visit was Mark Twain. Mark Twain was so interested in it. And then Waverly Beach, which is formerly Erie Beach, which was the first Atlantic city in North America.
Mm-hmm. And you have a video on that too, or at least you talk about it in one of your videos.
Yeah, and that's where Johnny Weissmuller was a lifeguard before he became an Olympic gold swimmer and Tarzan. And that's where Uncle Tom's Cabin was conceived, at that park.
Really?
In fact, the episode on Port Robinson, which is about 30 to 40, I'm lying, it's more like 25 minutes from me. In the 1940s, one of the most famous Hollywood actors would fly out from Hollywood into Buffalo, New York, take the ferry across, come into Canada, hop in a cab, take the 30-minute ride to Port Robinson, which is just a little alcove. It's like an elbow of a community, to go and try to convince this woman he was courting her. That guy was Bing Crosby. So Bing was down here quite a bit.
Oh, wow.
This went on for a long time. So there was a lot of influential folks that came here, but going back to the forts, they were the most bloodiest battles in North American history, other than, you had your Confederate War. But between Gettysburg and up this neck of the woods, you have two of the most bloodiest spots in North American history, where you had a lot of tragic deaths, a lot of just barbaric stuff done with bayonets, hatchets, the whole 9 yards. And we're not even bringing in the Native American tribes, that were at war too. So it was all about, it really hasn't changed today. It's all about money and power.
Well, and studying history is, it doesn't give you much hope for mankind. I mean, I study Scottish history for my books, and it's one war after another. You study English history, and it's the wars with the French, it's the wars with the Scots, it's the wars with America. You look at American history. I just stumbled across this number. How many years have we been a country? 270, something like that. And the number of years we have not been involved in wars was horrifyingly low.
Yeah, you basically didn't have any wars from 2016 to 2020.
Yes. Yeah. And there might have been a couple years somewhere in the 1800s where we weren't involved in wars. But you think we went from the Revolution to the War of 1812. I think were the Barbary Pirates before 1812 or slightly after. I think they were around the time the Marines were born. You look at history, and every country, everywhere, it's almost impossible for us not to be involved in wars, it seems.
No, and if you do a really deep dive, Laura, you will find out that oftentimes the powers that be are supplying both sides.
Oh my goodness, yes. Yes, I have read that so much in the last, 6, 7, 8 years that, people are making a ton of money off it. So given that you kind of do some work in, hauntings, paranormal, first of all, how did you get from a book to a TV series? Did you know someone on TV stations? Did you just approach people?
I had a TV show called Matters of the Mind, which I was a psychologist. So we would look at a different issue. So one day I was just hanging out with a friend. And first of all, where I live, Laura, Stephen King's book adaptation, The Dead Zone, was filmed here. Well, Christopher Walken's down here all the time still. He still comes down here. So that movie, The Dead Zone, was filmed here. So we have the famous screening tunnel, which is 6 minutes from it. The gazebo in the movie. The whole town was used in the movie, the old courthouse. So I remember I would hear all of these stories, and because I was teaching a psychology course and understanding the paranormal, one day I was just with a friend of mine. He went to, I want to say, USC Film School. He lives here. He does more acting and screenwriting, but more acting. And I just thought I wouldn't mind doing something with him because we had been friends for a long time. So I just said to him, let's do these little 15-minute episodes of these cool ghost stories that are tied to history, kind of in film, like the Stephen King stuff. And there's some other really cool places. So I don't know how it got back, but one of the networks here contacted me and said, hey, Pete, it was where I did the mental health show. They said, hey, I heard that you're interested, you're thinking about doing a show on ghost stuff. Where are you doing this? I said, oh, we're going to stream it online. Because I have followers that they'd be interested.
Right.
And then I remember Jack saying, well, why don't you let us host it? We'll bring it on there. And so that's where it wound up running. It went on there, I want to say, for 3 seasons, roughly. And then we just went out on our own, and we had our own YouTube channel, which I had gazillions of viewers. And in fact, God rest her soul, one of the last people that had signed up before I pulled the channel down was Sinead O'Connor. She was
way.
Yeah, Sinead was very interested in this stuff. I don't know how the heck she heard of it. It could have been through David Morrissey. When I was talking with him at the Comic-Con, because we're talking Walking Dead stuff,
right?
And then David Morrissey is like, you have that haunted show, don't you? I said, yeah. So and by the way, you hear David Morrissey he was in the one movie with Kate Hudson, the Skeleton Key, that movie, I think it was. Okay. And then he was obviously in The Walking Dead, so he's got the Southern accent. But David Morrissey's British as they come, so he's got this very British accent. He's a big soccer fan. So so he goes, in his British accent, you got that ghost show. And I said, and I'm trying to be sheepish and pretend, well, no, it's not me, but yeah, okay, yeah. He's gonna think I'm a whack job here. So we go from The Walking Dead and other stuff where I've taken bit parts in to he goes, my little wife loves that stuff. So really, so he's picking my brain, going like, what is the haunted stuff? Like, what do you see? And we have another Canadian actor, same thing, Peter Outerbridge, where he came to us at the one con. He came up to me at the one Comic-Con and goes, oh, I've seen your show or whatever. And then I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, I've seen your movies. They're really good. And so instantly it's like, tell me about this haunted stuff, because his wife was with him and he wants to know all about the haunted stuff. So I found that I remember, and he was one of my mentors. After I did my postdoc, I did a second master's degree in theology, and I became affiliated with Dr. Robert Schuller, Bristol Cathedral, Bob Schuller. And I love Bob. Bob, to me, was a very good role model, because Bob went from being a psychologist to becoming a pastor. Oh, wow. A lot of people don't know that, because his teacher was Norman Vincent Peale. So I remember Bob Schuller always saying, find a need and fill it. He goes, when you find a need, fill it. And then he always used to say, always make your dreams big enough so God will fit into them. Because he goes, if you're dreaming puny dreams, you don't need God. So God's not going to show up and show out. So dream big dreams, because that's what gets his attention. And because I remember, I believe it was Mel that went to him with the Passion of the Christ. And I remember he told Mel, he told Mel, he goes, Mel, this is not your idea. You got to do this for God. This is your calling to do this movie. And so, Bob Schuller was a great influence to so many people. And, I'll never forget the day he phoned me. There was like this dead silence. And all of a sudden he started every show, the episode of the Crystal Cathedral, he would go, this is the day the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it. So I'm listening to that voice. I'm thinking, I know that voice. I know that voice. Oh, it's like, and then I said, oh my God, and then he goes, no, it's not God. It's Bob Schuller.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
I'd like to think that it was God. I mean, that's something I'm kind of practicing, is getting up in the morning and saying, this is the day the Lord has made. And like this morning, I didn't sleep all night because I was so worried about our rabbits. Like last winter, we were in Duluth, so we were prepared. We have them in a detached garage, cement floor with the heater. They were fine. I didn't have to worry. Well, we moved down to Tennessee, where it's not supposed to get much colder than 20 degrees. And all of a sudden, it's 5 below zero. And I was up all night. I had done everything I could. But I woke up this morning and I'm like, am I going to find all these rabbits dead, stiff as a board? Light as a feather.
I'm hoping that the barn is not in danger of collapsing from all the things she stapled to the wall.
I stapled everything to the walls, trying to keep those rabbits warm. But I woke up and it's like, okay, well, got to thank God for the day, whatever may come.
Exactly.
So
and the rabbits are going, you do know who made us.
Well, there, I was actually torn between, are they going to freeze to death, or have I insulated them so well some of them are going to suffocate to death, because I've got 15 blankets over their cages, trying to keep them warm, but they're all fine. But
Yeah, it really is interesting because we're at that stage. We're having this polar freeze week where if you turn the heat up, like the way our house is situated, if it's too hot with the heater in there, it feels so uncomfortable during the night. And then if it's too cold, you can't get this happy medium. And I woke up feeling horrible this morning because of that. And then only to see my feet are soaked as I'm walking out. And I'm like, why are my feet all of a sudden wet, cold? Am I having a lucid dream? I'm still dreaming. It's like, oh no, you're not dreaming. Your freaking bloody aquarium's all over your damn dining room floor. Oh, what a great way, because normally every morning, without word of fail, I always start my day out with, this is the day the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it, Lord. And I had to struggle to get that out this morning.
It was a lot of fun.
So can I ask you a couple more questions that I wanted to ask during the interview, but I ran out of time? I wanted to ask you, in your last reading, you posed this question, and I think you actually didn't go into chapter 1 or chapter 2, you just did the intro. But in the further part of it, you asked the question, can a house be truly evil? And I was curious what your conclusion was on that, especially the work you've done.
100%. I'll try to give you, in Canada, we always call, Chris may know the term Cole's Notes version, which is, so somebody I consider my older sister, she passed away. She was my best friend. She was a psychic medium. She was a Christian. And I met her, she was a student, and she had signed up for my paranormal course to try to get in an argument with me because she thought I was going to be some sort of egotistical snob, as she had put it, that's going to put all these folks down. At the end of the class, she came up, introduced herself, and said, my gosh, you were totally opposite what I ever thought you would be. Her and I became best friends until she passed on, and her husband left the area. Well, make a long story short, she used to consult for Interpol and large police organizations around the world. They'd show up at her doorstep. She would aid and assist in finding murder suspects and also missing people. And she was good. I profiled a case with her. She was very, very, very good.
And she did this in part because she was psychic.
Yeah, and she always, I was the biggest skeptic, and I am with a lot of them. And she even said, don't trust half of them and trust even less of them. And
I think that's wise advice. I think there are people who genuinely do know things, but I think you have to be very careful.
And she stripped me naked. One day I went to her house and she kept bugging me, let me read you. And for the better part of 3 months, I said, hell no. I don't believe in, and I don't even want to know. She did. And everything she said was bang on to the exact date that would happen 12 days later. And to this day, it's like, how the hell did you do that? I'm still in my mind. And people can go, well, it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. Hell no, it was not, because one of my best friends that was a Catholic priest that went to rehab at the Mayo Clinic for drinking. He founded the band Thin Lizzy and Bob Geldof and the Boomtown Rats. He's from Ireland. And he grew up with Gabriel Byrne. And David was going to be the actor when he was young, and Gabriel was going to be the priest. They wound up flipping because David was in a car accident, broke his back, was in the hospital for nearly a year, got the call in to become a priest. Make a long story short, he winds up at guest house at the Mayo Clinic. And I hadn't spoken to him for years. And the psychic medium or psychic Janet Kent tells me, who's David? And I go, she describes him. He's got really blue eyes, very fair hair, looks very debonair, very like a movie star. And I think, you gotta be kidding me.
Wow.
You're seeing him. She goes, yes, David needs to talk to you and you're going to see him in 2 weeks. I go, well, where am I going to see him? because he's not around here and I haven't spoken to him in years. And she goes, he needs to talk to you. You will see him in 2 weeks. I remember sitting there, I'm eating a sandwich. My doorbell rings. David's at my front door. First words out of his mouth is, in his Irish accent, Pete, I need to speak with you. And I call her up not too long after he leaves. And she's laughing on the other end. And she goes, oh, did you get a visitor, Peter?
That's fantastic. What did he need to speak to you about?
I don't even really remember what it was. I had helped him when he went into recovery.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was something along the lines of that. However, with that said, that was when I said, I will let you read me now.
Mm-hmm.
What are you seeing? And she was smack on with a whole whack of different things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but from the perspective of the fact that you know psychology is a field, and so you know that people can know one another at very deep levels. And even though this seems to be profoundly factual of a nature that doesn't necessarily speak to spiritual, it does speak to spiritual center rather than a psychological center. But is it possible, again, from the standpoint, think of psychopaths, think of people who can be remarkably tuned to others, that even details such as a blue-eyed person who wants to speak with you could potentially come out, in just someone knowing you or knowing who you are, knowing of you, and things like that deeply psychologically. Is it truly psychic, or is it just remarkably perceptive?
The only problem is with that, Chris, is I never named him. She gave me his name, gave me the exact words he would say, and she nailed it to the exact day he would show up on my front doorstep. So this goes back to the original question that you asked, can a house be evil? So I took pictures of this house, and it's in that book from one of the reading that I did. There's a house not too far that people had abandoned in the middle of the night, much like the Amityville. I had taken pictures of that house. Nobody to this day has lived in this thing for 50 years.
Wow.
Everybody who tries to buy it, tries to redo it. It's a landmark. Nobody will live in it. Every deal follows through.
So I'm curious, I've seen ads for houses where they actually make it a selling point that this house is haunted. And just as a side note, years ago, my children were convinced that our house in Bremerton, Washington was haunted. There's a funny story behind this involving my then husband's missing wedding ring that was missing for a year. And years later, it came out that they found his wedding ring, and they naturally concluded that it was the one true ring. And so they threw it behind the stove because we didn't have a volcano to throw it into in order to save us from the Dark Riders or whatever they're called, Lord of the Rings. And so for the
depths of Mordor.
Right. For 10 years, I was mad at my ex-husband. How could you lose your wedding ring? And finally, as my daughter is leaving for college, she's like, Mom, we took his ring. We thought it was the one true ring, and we were trying to save you from the Dark Rider. So anyway, I find this interesting about houses because I lived in a house in Duluth, and my dad was in the Air Force, so we moved around a lot, and our second to last house was in Duluth. And it was this house that just had a feeling of love and of joy, and people wanted to be in it. So it had been on the market 5 hours when my parents bought it. And at the time they sold it, it was 1983. Anybody who knows Duluth in 1983, the housing market was horrible. You could expect your house to be on the market for 5 years. That was just the norm. And so my dad had not decided whether to retire or not, which affected whether we should sell the house or not. Well, they accidentally sold the house out from under us in 3 days because people just walked into this house and they wanted to be part of it. And in fact, we heard one, I think it was somebody who lived there after us. We somehow heard that previous owners would come back to this house, and one previous owner wanted to write a book about all the people who have lived in this house because this house just attracted people. And so it's like the opposite of what you're talking about.
Oh, I believe that.
I found that fascinating. And I think a lot of people, unless they experience it firsthand, don't believe that a house can have that. And, you know, I'm curious, do you have any idea why this particular house that you're talking about would just embody evil?
And associated with that, I would say, is it the house itself
Or
that's evil, or is it demon possessed? So
like what
deeply,
happened there?
You know, that
It's possessed from. So when I was going to first start out, you had asked me about how did I start out the show? So remember I was saying a buddy and mine were just going to shoot these 15, 20-minute snippets. So we were down in Niagara Lake. We went to go film at the gazebo that was in Stephen King's movie, The Dead Zone. So we were just getting some footage. So we went to this tea place. So women are in there and then they see us with all this camera equipment. They go, hey, and this was dead winter. We were out there doing it and they're going, are you filming? Like, what are you guys doing? We explained it. And she goes, oh my God, I got to tell you a story. She was the first person down there to tell me the story of this house, but I already knew about this house from my late friend and others. So this woman goes, oh, you got to go and film at this house. So I'm letting her tell her story because I thought, okay, I already know what house she's telling me about. So she said when she and two other friends, they broke in there when they were in their early 20s. They went in there because they had heard all the stories. Derelict house, they went in through the bottom window and they brought a Ouija board. She said, we were not even in there 15, 20 minutes. We started with the Ouija board. The Ouija board burst into flames. It went up on its own. She goes, wow. We ran the hell out of there. We never went back. Mm-hmm. So I would hear other stories like that. But my late friend, I had taken pictures of the house and she made me promise for the rest of my life I would never do two things. Never set foot in that house because she said she saw me. If I go in that house, I'm going through the floor. Something bad would happen.
Saw you what?
I'm going through the floor.
Okay.
And she said, I don't even want you to set foot on that property.
Mm-hmm.
I then, when we were filming Niagara's Most Haunted first year, I had this guy that was a dowser. So he came to this place called the Buttery, which is an old historical restaurant that they do this King Henry's feast upstairs. Mm-hmm. So we went by that house. He started telling me about the house. And he said he could see the teenagers hanging out the window. There's nobody there, but he saw them heckling him, hanging out the window, screaming obscenities. And he said they would have been like 1920s, 30s, 40s, around there. I don't know the year. I don't remember.
Okay.
The pictures I had taken of this house, I had my psychic late friend that had done stuff for Interpol had shown her friend the picture of the house, and her friend said she saw teenagers. Her friend was a psychic at a weekly radio show, huge here in Canada, said she saw teenagers hanging out the window. So fast forward first year of Niagara's Most Haunted, we're filming this place called Butler's Burial Ground and this old cemetery that's actually got George Washington's gardener buried there. That's where he retired after he was done in Washington. So I've got this psychic. He's typical New Yorker, Stan. He's right from New York City. And he's the psychic on this episode. So I said, Stan, I'm going to bring you to a house. I never told him anything about it. He's got bupkis to go on, nothing. I drop him off there with the producer. And I go, we're going to leave because this is an illegal property. First of all, it's a private property. Even nobody lives there. You're not supposed to be there because everybody goes by there. Mm-hmm. And we're talking, this guy's a 70-year-old man that gets out. And this guy is running out there like Charlie freaking Brown with his partner. I never seen a guy move so fast running to this. He's so excited. So we wait 10 minutes. Rich swings the van around because it's got the freaking production company's name on it. So we park down the street, Stan sees us and he comes. He gets in the van. I go, so lay it on me. what did you come up with? And he goes, well, it used to be juveniles living in that home.
Mhm.
One killed another, and then he hung himself in the stairway.
Oh, wow.
I could see him as, he's going, Peter, I could see him as plain as day.
Mhm.
His story matched up with everybody else's.
Mhm.
And every person that is quote unquote psychic / whatever have all said the same thing, Laura, it's an evil house. So when I was doing the last season of the Paranormal Profilers, where we were no longer on a network, we went into a YouTube channel, and then we were doing stuff with Comic-Cons. I brought this Michelle DeRoche. She is the host of Canada's Most Haunted. She's very well known. She's like Canada's Elvira, and she's got all the equipment. We went by that house one night, and I'm standing on the sidewalk. That's as far as I would go.
Mhm.
Her and members of my team have an infrared box and an obelisk that they can communicate with whatever's in the house, if there is anything. Well,
Mhm.
he's holding this thing up to the house like you would see if you went fishing, where you could see the fish below.
Yeah.
I'm watching something walking back and forth that's hotter than hell, that's red.
Uh-huh.
Michelle then starts communicating, and she communicates with this. Her and I, we don't talk anymore. I want nothing to do with her, to be honest. She
Mhm.
communicates with demons.
Mhm.
He's communicating with this thing, and she goes, "What are you?" And it says right there, "Devil."
Wow.
It's
Yeah.
telling her what it is.
I just came across a very interesting, where did I find this? In the last 2 days, YouTube channel, I believe. And they were talking about how pilots in World War II were given night goggle visions, but they were red instead of
Demons. They're
phase
seeing
green.
demons.
You know about this. And
Yes, I do.
they believed they saw demons. And I thought, isn't that interesting that, as a matter of faith, we're told that angels and demons exist, and we're just supposed to accept that you can't see them, but they're really there. And it's like, oh my gosh, what if that's the simple explanation? We simply can't see most of the color spectrum.
No, and that's what I think people are going to find out more. It could be as early as this year, from what I've been told. I did a couple documentaries where I was connected to really knowing individuals both in Canada and the United States that are very high up in different positions.
Mhm.
The whole thing with the UFO thing, they're not UFOs, they're demons.
Mhm.
And there's also angels. That's what they're seeing. Like, just to put things in perspective, where Ray lives, I'm doing his new music video. He lives about an hour and 15 minutes from me, to maybe an hour and a half. They found the bones of a Nephilim there, a giant.
Yeah, I've read a lot about that. I listened to, well, I haven't in a week or so, but a channel called the Y Files, WHY. And I find him very interesting because he tries very hard to give both the pro and the con, and to really look at the evidence either way. But that's an interesting story, the Nephilim. I am curious what you think. You mentioned the Dead Files earlier. So from your experience, do you find them very legitimate?
I didn't mean the TV series.
Yeah, yeah.
I do believe Steve does his work.
Mm-hmm.
I love Steve. Steve's awesome. Steve is a former homicide detective in New York. He was there when the Twin Towers came down. He was in there pulling people out.
Was he really?
Yeah, Steve lives in Florida now. And,
Okay.
you know, if you were ever to be at a Paracon and you see Steve, the question he hates the most is, have you ever seen a ghost? He hates that question because he's like me, he's a skeptic.
Okay.
So from what I know, and what I will say is, Steve is more of the history guy with the
Right.
or whatever. So I really do place a lot of respect for what that man does. He is a rock star on that show. And now they've got a new woman on there, supposedly. Steve was down here in Buffalo in 2019. I was supposed to hook up with them. They were filming an episode in Amherst, New York, and something happened with this plane delay and then other stuff. We never did connect. However, when they did the Spoons last music video, Steve's in it actually holding up one of the signs. Because the Spoons, they're a huge Canadian rock. They were huge Canadian rock band, friends of mine. Gord is the singer in the Spoons and the guitarist, but Gord also plays in A Flock of Seagulls. He's their guitarist.
Really?
Yeah. So
Flock of Seagulls. I mean, that's going back to the 90s.
80s.
That Flock of Seagulls.
Yeah. So
Okay,
in the video, yeah, because I've got A Flock of Seagulls in there. I've got Wang Chung. I've got them all in there. Like they're friends of Gord's, and then like I know Mike Story. He is the lead vocalist of A Flock of Seagulls. He was at Gordon's wedding, so I was him, and I'm just thinking who else was in there. Corey Hart was in our video, but Steve de Shiavi's in it. He's holding it like Dead Files. He's holding his sign.
That is so cool.
Yeah, because I said, Steve, I want you to be in this video, and would you mind? And Steve's like, sure, bro, I'll do it or whatever. And the song is New Day, New World, like the video. If you were to find it on YouTube.
I think I might have actually started to watch that one this afternoon. That name is familiar, so I think I watched part of it. And I ran out of time because I had to make sure the rabbits had warm enough water, like not blocks of ice. To answer your question, I would say out of all of these, that's a good show. Mm-hmm. Because of Steve. I'm curious because Amy's all over the place. Like, some days it's you need to get in a male psychic, and some days you need to get in a Wiccan witch, and some days you need to get in a sensitive, and some days you need to get in a priest who's an exorcist. Like, if it's haunted, why don't you just always call in an exorcist? What is the difference, And so we did start to wonder at a certain point, okay, is this all scripted? Is it, No, it's
not scripted. He really does his work. Like he has to. And that's why I look at what he does. And he's really, if you look at it, he's got to prove factual evidence. Mm-hmm. She never has to prove anything.
Right. And yet it always does. Well, okay, mostly match up. Sometimes we kind of joke, like a lot of the things did happen pretty close to the house that explain what's going on. But sometimes it's like, oh, there was a battle, a mile from here. And we're like, okay, so why are the people who died in a battle a mile from here haunting this house instead of all the other houses in the neighborhood?
Exactly.
So, we do sometimes, and then of course we start joking. I discovered that there was a battle in Asia Minor, and we think that that's what's affecting your house in California. So, sometimes we're like, okay, I think that,
it's reaching.
Tragedy happened a little far from the house, but
yeah. So, but like I said, out of all of them, and I don't watch them religiously. I'll watch at the odd time if I can't sleep. I'll flip it on, and part of it is the familiarity. I like Steve, so I just want to see what Steve is doing or what he's saying. And I'll be honest, I watch his part. I don't really watch the other part.
Yeah. But that's kind of neat to know someone who's on the program and know them personally, and I think. As you alluded to earlier, you have to be careful. There are probably millions of people who claim that they hear things, see things, know things. Well, some of them do, but some of them don't. Some of them are shysters. And so there's always that, how do you discern?
Exactly. And it's like I tell people right from the get-go, like having done that show, I burst a lot of bubbles where I say, I'm only in it for the history. Mm-hmm. I've done a lot of talks on it. And they'll go, what is the scariest thing you saw? And I'll say, the scariest thing I saw, Angel Inn, which is, 7 minutes down the road. It's the oldest pub in all of Canada. It's beautiful in there. It's really cool. And it was burned by the Americans, War of 1812. And they said, oh, did you see Captain Swayze's ghost? Nope. Well, what did you see that was scary? Well, Barry Williams took me into the men's bathroom. And in the men's bathroom, Barry's British. It's a British pub. He's right from England. And it was the story Barry told me. He goes, oh, did he see a ghost? I was like, no. brought me into the men's bathroom, showed me the urinal, and in the urinals, they have a little soccer net with a ball swing in, so men, when they're taking a piss, can try to hit the ball the whole time. And they go, well, what's scary? And I'll say, because Barry says he's got to continually replace those. People steal them.
That's funny. And I
said,
was thinking that
that's
you're going
scary.
to say,
Thinking your man's actually reaching in there and pulling out that and taking
right.
it in a restaurant of all places.
So I have to ask then, you know, doing the work you do, and it sounds like between both faith and science, you maybe don't want to admit that you believe in ghosts, but you kind of do.
Oh, I do. I believe in them. Mm-hmm.
How do you explain that you have never experienced any of this despite going in? You know, do you think that some people can see them and some people just never will?
I'm a block. That's what my friend told me.
A block?
A block. I block it. And I want to say, I think Steve said the same thing was said about him before. He's a block too.
I've wondered that, you know, that he's going into all these houses where she's sensing all these things. And I've never thought he's lying or making it up.
No, Steve is not at all. I don't, maybe it wasn't Steve. It could have been somebody else. But Steve and I had this chat before too. But I was told by Janet, she goes, you're a block. I go, what do you mean? She goes, first of all, you are very intuitive, whether you want to know this or not, Peter. You're very psychic. I will give her props because I think that is what made me a good profiler, that I can read people like books. Mm-hmm. And it's a scary propaganda because I'm too empathic that I can take on and then I feel it and I feel drained. So I get drained very easy. It's like, you know, you call them psychic vampires. So with that, Laura, when I go in, I was going into these places. First of all, I'm more concerned with the production. I'm more concerned with everybody getting along with each other, playing nice, everybody being fed, everybody being taken care of. So part of it, I'm blocking the openness to the experience. I'm not in there to enjoy it that way. Part two with this, I've been around, quote unquote, these country bumpkin carny psychics. They don't like me. I've walked into these quote unquote psychic fairs, and it's almost like their feathers are up on edge when I walk past them or I look at them.
Interesting.
I believe part of it is they do have a gift, but where are they getting this gift from? As my psychic friend once said, who is giving you this information? Are you getting it from the good side or are you getting it from the bad side?
Exactly.
So with that said, we had this museum-ish sort of fair thing where there was a quote unquote psychic. She was part of this thing. And she started telling me, she goes, I'm a psychic, blah, 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 I can read you. So she started to try to read me. She couldn't read crap. Like, if her life depended on it, she couldn't read me. She read my whole career wrong, everything. So I said, no. She goes, how right am I? And I go, you're not right at all. But I go, my turn. I read her for 3 minutes and I nailed everything about her. She walked away.
Oh, interesting.
I'm a profiler. I read everything about her. And then she almost fought me with it, where her former son-in-law came up and goes, oh boy, you nailed her. And the same thing at a party too. This is going back 20 years ago, where this woman came up to me and go, you're a profiler, blah, blah, blah. You don't know, blah, blah, blah. She'd been drinking. And then she goes, do me, read me. She pushed at Laura for a good hour. And I had a few too many to drink. And then at one point, I just got frustrated by her prodding me. And I gave her, which sounded like a rap song, I read her nonstop for 2 minutes. She started crying and walked away. She goes, you are so wrong. You know shit. You are terrible at your job. After she walked away crying, her best friend that was with her tells me is that you literally live in distraction mode too. Just like fishing.
Yeah.
And that's what I found with them. And that's why they don't like me, because they'll ask me a question. And I'll say, you don't need to ask me the question. You tell me. And then the other thing too is what I teach clients that live with narcissists or they worry about being in a pattern of narcissistic behavior, I always teach them to gray rock others or gray stone them. And they go, well, what's that, doc? Gray rock. Show no emotion. Show no face. And that's where it's funny, because these quote unquote psychic mediums, they're looking at me and they're trying to read me. But actually, what's disturbing is I have this ability to look through people and I'll start looking through them. And I don't know what it is. I think they think I know something about them, and you can start to see them primping and fidgeting. And then I start inside, I'm smirking, going, oh, I'm getting to them so bad. This is, and so that's where the questions then start.
Okay, that's when they start asking you questions?
Yeah, they'll start asking me something, and it'll be like, I'm sitting to myself like, this isn't a freaking speed dating thing here where we're questions. You said you were going to read me. You were going to tell me something. So tell me. That's what you're telling me. If I'm reading a book, Laura, I'm not asking the book questions.
Right.
I'm reading it.
And it sounds like they're often disturbed by what you read.
Yeah. Like it's like, I used to teach this to students, cops, read interrogation method, which is how to interrogate a suspect versus questioning a witness. So, and it's the same principle that these folks rely on reading body language. If they can't get verbal language from you, then they're going to the nonverbal cues. So if you give them neither, you're making them really show their authenticity. Right. So, but then again, I don't go to any of these people because to me, it goes against my belief in God. Only God knows the future. So, but God.
I'm curious, you know, a lot of people think that science and faith are at odds. Do you feel like you need to reconcile those, or only to explain to others that?
No, I believe powerful people made them at odds. Whereas science is using religion more so, because if you look at biblical prophecies, what is it? 50 to 60% of them have come true. Why are archaeologists and fortune hunters using the Bible to go on their digs and find it?
Oh, are they really?
Yeah. A lot of them, like you can go, like there has been so much covered up. Like the fact that they've pulled out chariot wheels where the Red Sea was parted. They found horse bones at the bottom of the Red Sea. They'd carbon dated it right. That would have been when Moses parted it. They have found the real tests. I believe it was done early 80s with the Shroud of Turin.
Yes, that's fascinating.
The fact that the blood sample off there is XO, and it's the only known blood sample in human history to still be alive.
Okay, so the blood sample is XO?
XO. So you have...
I've never heard of XO. Now, I had heard, are you familiar with Eucharistic miracles at all?
Yep.
Okay, and the blood type that they type from that is, here's my dog.
Oh.
This is an Irish Wolfhound. Hey, sweetheart, come in here. But I did find that fascinating years ago when I read that in Eucharistic miracles, it's type O, the universal donor.
Because that's
the muscle is the striated heart muscle. It's fascinating.
Yep. But just to go with the shroud, it's because it really was an immaculate conception.
Yeah.
But you know, people go, well, why don't I ever see this? Why can't I find it? And this is my theory on it. A friend of mine, Bo Polony, put out. And Bo's a retired doctor. That's a timeline analyst, God's timeline analyst. He uses the Bible. And it's really interesting. It's like he said, because if too much gets, even the good ideas that have been proven true in the Bible, then people are going to have to accept all of it as being true, and they just don't want that.
Yep, because that puts limits on our lives.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure to talk to you. And